Welcome back to Everyone Has a Story. We're so glad you're here. This week's adventure is about an ancient tradition that will never be performed again in the same way. A story of fate and the passage of time that forever changed the sacred aspect of our Midé Way. It's most strange how so many of the buildings and other items of importance seem to just disappear as we grow older. Take, for example, the home of my formative years in southern Ohio. It's not the memories that disappeared, but the physical buildings. Today there's nothing more than an empty lot with a few stones that were the front porch, the horse mounting stone, and the stone slab walkway in the front. The house, the barn, wrought iron fence, the cherry tree, and even the three-hole outhouse, all gone, vanished in the rubble. Likewise, my father's parents' home and business are all gone, now replaced by a cemetery. General stores, tobacco warehouses, and covered bridges no longer exist, except in my fading memory. With an indiscriminate broom, the giant hands of progress and abandonment sweep away all things man-made. It seems as if humankind has little need or desire for these things temporary. Even those made of stone are often ground back into gravel and sand to start their journey again. It is said the hardest stone mountain will become dust. Nothing lasts except memories shared from mouth to ear, the code of oral tradition, the Midé Way philosophy. Permit me to share a story about a very particular stone that existed long before the time of my youth. Created and used as a cultural center of my ancestors for centuries, it was the ceremonial altar stone of my American Indian ancestors, the Midé people of the Panji earth culture. I have been taught by my elders that our people have lived always in this area that we know today as the Panji Blue Creek, and that our culture and traditions are those of our ancestors who were the people who worked the stone and the earth and the water to honor the Creator that caused us to be. Anthropologists and archaeologists have, for over 2 centuries, attempted to define my ancestors only by the relics and the remnants that were left behind. We have been named by different scientists in different decades as the Mound Builders, the Hopewell people, Fort Ancient people, and just prehistoric Indians. All this without ever hearing a single word uttered by the people themselves. In fact, the professionals have absolutely rejected any possibility that there might be surviving descendants of those people. Isn't it quixotic of them to assume that they, by deciphering their runes, could define a whole group of peoples without any knowledge of how they thought, lived, and practiced their faith? Such is the religion of the churches of anthropology and archaeology. Please don't get me wrong. Their research and documentation have been of great value and importance in helping us, the descendants of these people, to understand the remnants of the physical attributes as they relate to our sacred oral traditions passed down to us. As our ancestors faced invasions of not only Europeans, but other nation-building tribes that swept into our homelands, our elders were often forced to leave behind our sacred ceremonial items, too large to carry. One such very large ceremonial item of our past is now missing. This was a very large altar stone that once rested on the headwater bluffs overlooking the vast valley of Lower Twin Creek in Scioto County, Ohio. This ancient boxed canyon, created by the glacier melts millennia before, was only accessible from the south until the first European settlers. They wanted to access from the north, and they carved a rudimentary road up the face of the ancient crumbling layers of the sandstone cliff. For centuries, this hidden valley was home to the keepers of the faith. Here, they created upon the face of a large flat stone an altar where the Panji Midé ceremonies were held. Close your eyes and envision the gathering upon the bluff above the creek. Elders and medicine people, practicing our ancient beliefs in the seclusion of this deep valley. If you listen closely, you could hear the rhythms and the chants and the reverent words spoken in a long ago forgotten language. As a child under the tutelage of my elders, the Midé, who were the carriers of the pipe, the keepers of our culture, I was gifted with an obligation to memorize and pass on the tenets of our faith. The principal belief held sacrosanct was learning and understanding our ancient traditional religion that we know to be the Midé Way. It is a study of the 4 levels of the earth and the 4 levels of the sky, that we may respectfully comprehend the great gifts of our Creator. On the surface, the premise is similar to the Midéian faith of our Anishinaabe cousins, but it is vastly different in many other ways. It's probable that both religions originated from our shared Algonquian tribal core. We will never know. As part of my learning of the rituals required, I was taken to the altar stone by one of my teachers, an elder Midé. We had traveled near the full length of the road along the creek until we were close to the bluffs that defined its headwaters. We took a couple of shovels and brooms from the back of the car and crossed the shallow creek. My Midé walked directly towards the sheer face of that wall. It looked insurmountable, but with just a slight move sideways, a near invisible crevice appeared in the wall. Covered with leaves and earth were ancient steps, stones placed there to the right and left like a Swedish ladder. The ascent was easy. Stepping into a clearing on the flat area of the bluff, we used the shovels and brooms to remove accumulation of soil and leaves. Where there had once been a shallow layer of materials, there now lay bare the ancient sacred altar stone. It was flat, nearly 7 foot around, with images and lines carved in its surface. In the center was a deeper depression, about 2 feet in diameter and nearly 6 inches deep, blackened from countless ceremonial fires. The first time I saw the altar stone, I was speechless. It was huge. I could have laid on the stone with arms outstretched, much as Leonardo da Vinci's Vitruvian Man's drawing. My hands nor my feet would extend beyond the stone's edge. It was spectacularly large. Clearing out the remnants of the earth in the blackened depression, we started a ceremonial fire. As we sat on the stone, I was taught the stories and the meanings of the various carvings. It's important to note that the religion of my people is not one of evangelism, but was taught to those related by blood to the people of the Panji Seppe Naube, and only when a student requested more knowledge. Therefore, the specifics of the teaching are only for our descendants. I will share with you, however, some of the carvings on the stone. On the areas, both to the north and south of the ceremonial fire pit, were 4 straight parallel lines radiating from the center, representing the studies of the 4 levels of the earth and sky. Above and below were symbols of our deity. There were other carvings that were our table of contents, notes to remind us of the individual teachings. This altar stone and the Comet Mound, better known as Serpent Mound, a few miles away, were the place of my annual pilgrimages for my studies with my Midés, until I joined the Navy. Occasionally later, during my visits to my family in Ohio, I would go to the source of our way to reaffirm my spiritual values. For the next 3 decades of my life, I lived mostly in Southern California. There, like most young men, I grew away from my childhood teachings and embraced those of the world. Gut deep, I still had a longing for the old places of my apprenticeship, and all the while I continued to practice my spirituality, sharing by example the basics of being a two-legged, a human born of the earth. As a spiritual pipe carrier, I was often asked to speak on subjects of Native American history and spirituality, which I shared within bounds. During those decades, the lights of the Midé Lodge dimmed, but were never extinguished. Nearly 40 years later, I returned to the place of the altar stone to find everything had changed. During my absence, a 100-year deluge had destroyed the creek bed below. Modern engineers surveyed the area and determined that there was nothing to hinder another disastrous flood in the valley. It was decided that the small creek that had for centuries before meandered back and forth across the valley, where the spring rains would flood, would be better served as a mostly controlled watershed. Giant earth-moving equipment created a creek bed that would control future flooding. Because of the great Lower Twin Creek flood and the erosions that followed, and the mechanical realigning of the creek bed, the bluff that had held the sacred altar stone for the millennia had disappeared. No remnant of it remained. I spent several days walking up and down the creek from where the old bluff had been, searching for any bit or piece of the stone. I found no trace. It's possible that the bluff, having given away, tipped the stone into the creek bed below, face down. At that point, it would look like any other large slab of bedrock. The altar stone had vanished. Back to the Church of Anthropology and Archaeology. In truth, I am the mirror image of an anthropologist or an archaeologist. I have no artifact to study, but I do have the ancient teachings of our oral traditions, whereas they have the artifacts without the knowledge, the secret of why the artifacts were created to begin with. They guess, I know. Since that time, I have used my small altar stone, made of the same rock as the original, to practice my religion. It has done me well all these years. I do long for the times when I sat and listened to the elders, as they would teach me the ways of our ancestors. Like a sponge, I willingly soaked it all in. Now I am the elder, teaching the ancient pathway of our spirituality to a chosen few. This experience reinforced the admonition that we must never allow the people to die. When I first heard those words as a child, I thought it meant never letting the elderly die in our family. Of course, that's impossible. Once, while sitting with one of my teachers, a beloved aunt, she explained to me in a way that I clearly understood. It simply meant that we should never allow our culture, our traditions, ceremonies, and spirituality die. It is our obligation, our job, to ensure that the path created before by our ancestors should never be forgotten, and that it be passed on to future generations by the ancient tradition of mouth to ear. That's why it is so important that each of us write down the stories that we were told by our grandparents and our elders. When the words die, never to be read or spoken again, it is then that the people die. Do you have a story about a tradition of your ancestors that's vanished or has been so altered that it's no longer the same? Please share it with us in the comments below. We'd love to hear them. Thanks for giving us a thumbs up, and please subscribe for more stories like these.